Welcome to the American Intelligence Media. I'm your host, and today I am with Randall White again by popular demand. Welcome to the show, Randall.
Well, hi, Douglas.
It's so great to be talking to you again, the author of American Popular Sovereignty, a guide to restoring participatory government and achieving remedy. Achieving remedy, my favorite line in that title. Why? Because just like our viewers, I got excited when I talked to you previously and when we had our last talk, because you told us that we can have sovereignty. We, the people, can have sovereignty, and there's many mechanisms to do that. And that's what these conversations are about. The thing that got people most excited last time was hearing about a grand jury. Now, I don't mean to make light of how absolutely horrendous our scenario is here in America politically, because I believe that we're in an active coup still to this very moment, that since even before Trump became president-elect, he was being attacked. And after the president, it becomes a coup. So we're talking about treason, sedition. We're talking about the worst high crimes that can be imaginable. And I think there need to be grand juries, because it doesn't look like William Barr is going to do much. Doesn't look like anybody in D.C. is ever going to prosecute anybody else in D.C. unless it's an absolute rarity. So you gave us hope last time, Randall. Can we pick up the conversation where we were before? What do we, the people, do to get our power back to literally have a grand jury or whatever? I don't care what you call it. Have a jury where we, the people, get to judge some of the crimes of the people in Washington, D.C., like a Hillary Clinton or a James Comey. It is impossible that those people should not be prosecuted. Is there a way that we can establish a judge, a jury? Can we have a place? And most especially, not only our listeners, but I myself want to help. I don't need to be in the jury, but I do want to help build the gallows. And if you can find us a judge that's a hanging judge, that's what I'd really like, because it shouldn't take long, but I don't want to devolve into the French Revolution where we just guillotine everyone. So, Randall, can you pick it up and tell us what we can do to get back what's in the name of your book, which your articles have been great that have been posted on the Cat Report? How can we get back popular sovereignty?
We, the people, have public powers. I mean, we have amazing powers, but we don't know about them and we don't use them anymore. When we look at the history of our country, America had 200 years of participatory government before we established a central government as a republic. In the Constitution, there was a Bill of Rights added 3 years later, which attempted to protect our civil rights, which were associated with participatory government. But the flaw in our Constitution is that it did not articulate and protect our traditional participatory governmental institutions. And so essentially all of the major political and economic problems that we have today come from that one basic flaw. And as a result, participatory government is dormant today. So the coup that you speak of, it never stopped. We've had several hundred years of coup, and it's just how the coup rears its ugly head and becomes visible and then goes back to being, below the surface of the water, if you will, in the swamp. But that's been going on for a long time. Even after the Constitution was established and America was recognized as sovereign in 1783 by Britain, Britain still has continued attacking us. We had the War of 1812. We had the Civil War. You know who was behind the Civil War? British insurrectionists, the City of London folks, the bankers. If it were for them, we wouldn't have had a civil war. Coming forward, in 1903, we had the Public Militia Act, which established a federal National Guard that was in the states, which is an extension of the Army, but functions like a federal militia within the states. the states responded by essentially withdrawing their state militias. There are some existing state militias, which are called state defense forces, but they don't have most of the functionality that militias had, prior to the 1900s. And what's important about that is that the militias were active in protecting our civil rights. They protected our juries. When it came to our grand juries, the militia's role was essential. That is what protected both the functionality of the grand juries from representative government and protected the citizens' access to the grand juries. Well, when we lost our militias, we lost our grand juries. When we lost our grand juries, we got the Federal Reserve Act, we got World War I. We definitely would not have been in World War I if it weren't for the Federal Reserve and for the loss of our grand jury access. It's just there was a domino effect there, and the details can be covered later. But as we come forward, we had the Great Depression, which was also a symptom of the Federal Reserve. But it isn't just the Federal Reserve. It's an interaction between the coup, which really did effectively take over our representative government by varying degrees over the last 120 years.
That's amazing. See, now we don't know that. We're not taught that in our civics classes. And I, being a history teacher, taught civics, and I didn't know that. So is that the reason why you said that grand juries are somehow somewhat connected, or seemingly maybe a court martial? And then who is it that calls that grand jury? Who is it that impanels that grand jury if it's going to be done by we the people?
Let me go back a little bit further to the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta means the Great Charter. The Magna Carta had grand jury oversight provisions. The grand jury was not like a co-equal branch of government with the chief representative, which was a monarch. Historically in America, the grand jury has always been over all of representative government, all of the legislators, all of the judiciary, and all of the executives. And those powers are still reserved to we the people. Being the grand jury is a participatory institution. It's traditional government in America, and it's never been delegated to the federal government. The problem is that with our grand juries being now dormant, there's no accountability. There's no investigation. There's no prosecution of public corruption. What I see is the fast track to restoring grand jury functionality and our access to grand juries would be an executive order by President Trump, which would establish an executive agency, which he can do via executive order. And the agency would be the grand jury administration. And that would be the whole job of that agency, which is to administer the grand juries. And it would take the administration of the grand juries and the manipulation of the grand juries out of the representative judiciary and out of the representative prosecutions. I mean, as it is, the courts control when the grand juries are convened, how they're convened, where they are convened, who is selected, when the grand juries are shut down, and the executive prosecutors, they write essentially all of the indictments. They control what issues and what evidence is presented to the grand juries. The net effect is that our grand juries are merely a rubber stamp of executive prosecution, and the executive and the judiciary work together behind the scenes as one entity. And so the only way that I see to realistically overcome that problem is either one, through an executive order, or two, through the ballot initiative process. And so since we want fast remedy, we the people must educate ourselves And that does mean buying a copy of American Popular Sovereignty and reading it and discussing it. Come up to speed, because there's a civics education there, a real one that none of us have ever had. And I didn't have a civics education. And the only reason I have one now is because I did the research and I wrote the book.
What I hear
Go
you saying
ahead.
is beautiful. This is absolutely beautiful. There's no reason that Trump couldn't establish a grand jury administration. Now, who would be the judges that would be impaneled on these grand juries if Trump allowed this to happen? And who would then bring issues? Would they just anyone and we the
The
people could
grand
bring the
jury.
issue?
The grand jury has plenary or full and complete powers of investigation and prosecution. The petite juries round out those powers in that the petite jury has full powers of adjudication of cases, both civil and criminal, when a trial by jury is conducted. Anyway, they're divided up that way for good reason. So you have procedure where you have investigation and vetting of evidence. The grand jury proceedings are conducted in private so that people's reputations are not destroyed and so on. But if they find sufficient evidence for probable cause for issuing a presentment or an indictment, which is two, they're almost identical charging instruments which set forth charges for the purpose of prosecution. The difference is that a presentment is conducted of the grand jury's own volition and without a judge's signature. The difference in an indictment is that it's all the same, except for a judge signs off on the presentment, and thus it becomes an indictment. Now, a grand jury can choose whoever it wants to prosecute a case. As a matter of convenience, it can rely on an executive prosecutor, but it doesn't have to. And, especially if it's concerned about public corruption, then it would be normal for a grand jury to appoint a special prosecutor in the matter. And it can be anyone, and it doesn't have to be an attorney.
I love what I'm hearing. This is beautiful. Now, how is it that we would have standing for the questions that we would bring before these judges who had been chosen who may not even be lawyers? I love that because you could choose someone sensible, someone with some morality, someone who wasn't already bought and paid for, and someone who might have a responsive interaction with the people who put that judge in that position instead of being a lifelong appointment, which to me is just insane. So how do we get our standing? Is it just because we've always had the standing? We just didn't know that we have it now, and because we aren't really clever lawyers, we
Yes, that's actually true. See, the grand jury is a judicial body. It has essentially employees. The Traditionally, it was the job of the militia, which is a citizens police force, to be at the beck and call of the grand juries. But also, the militias were the eyes and ears for the grand jury in the community. So, anytime a militia member or collectively they observed criminal activity or public corruption or the threat of any type of crime, they could report to the grand jury, and the grand jury would conduct an investigation. That was a preemptive approach to protecting society. It wasn't like you have to wait until a crime has been committed against you and then you call the police, and the police comes out and fills out a report and says, well, we'll do our best to apprehend the criminal or whatever. The relationship between the grand juries and the militias was actually preventative. And that's where we would like to be, to have better safety, security, and protection. Grand juries can have staff, and basically they can have whoever they want as staff. So there are court clerks, there are magistrates, there are full judges. A magistrate is like an assistant judge. Properly speaking, a grand jury should have a magistrate available to serve the grand jury whenever necessary. And then the same thing is true with a judge as well.
Well, then Donald Trump just needs to write the executive order and we are ready to go because
Yes.
I'm going to suggest that you're going to be our judge, seeing that you actually understand some of these archaic laws that have been swept under the rug to basically, I would say, supplant the power of the local authorities by the federal authorities. For instance, I was shocked to find out, but I found this out a long time ago. A sheriff is the highest person in a county. When the feds come into a county, they have to have the permission of the sheriff to even act. That shows the kind of popular sovereignty that you're talking about and participatory government because when the feds come in and take over an investigation that you have in your own county, the sheriff, well, why would the sheriff even allow that? Why were the feds any better than the people on the ground? And it is a priori assumption that the feds have more resources, they're better, and so on and so forth. No, that isn't true. So where's the place? Once we get this order from, and I also want to ask a second question, is there any other way to do this? But let's say that President Trump says, it's about time to reinstate the grand jury, but I'm going to give you U.S. Marshals instead of a militia, and I'm going to give you a court, and I'm going to let a group of people. Now, how do we determine who are the group of people that get this thing going if it were to start going? That would be the question. Would it be the petitioners? Would it be people who already had concerns for preventative security, as you pointed out, or that there is something seriously wrong in our government and it is our duty, according to the Constitution, to participate and to achieve remedy? I love your phrase. We need to achieve a remedy. So what do we do? Is there another way around getting an executive order? And if there was an executive order to start a grand jury administration, what can you tell us in your imagination, because I know it hasn't happened, but what might that look like so that it wouldn't be a counterpoint or a point of contention, but would be an additive process, but also a remedy? And if you're going to remedy, you first have to acknowledge the illness before you even take the remedy, and then hope for the remedy. So how would that look for you? And also, am I right about that? Is it with the sheriff and the locals and this grand jury is kind of, in a way, reclaiming the ancient standing that we had when it was our duty to correct government when it went wrong? I mean, that's what I'm hearing in between the lines of what you're saying.
Yes. You raised a number of issues. One I'd like to address is the foundation in law for our grand jury access and organization. For 200 years prior to our Constitution, we had participatory government and including grand juries, which were articulated in our public charters and in statutes associated with those public charters. Participatory government actually was formally established, but when we come to the Constitution, the participatory government was not formally established as part of our central government. And so you were pointing to the problem coming from the central government. The problem has metastasized to where we have essentially the same problems on local government and in most sheriff's departments as well. The most sheriffs are in fact just as corrupt as any of the swamp creatures in the federal government. It's a situation where we, the people, have to use the ballot initiative process to establish our grand juries and our civil rights in our public charters. And so really what it's doing is reestablishing what was the norm 200 years ago. On the federal level or with the central government, the fast track is with President Trump issuing an executive order. Truthfully, this is an opportunity that has not existed in our lifetimes until now. I have faith in President Trump in this matter. And so he, just like all of the rest of us, needs to be educated as to our public powers and how to use them.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. Someone criticized him the other day because he didn't know how many people die of influenza in America year. Well, who would know? That is hidden by the CDC as they're giving out a flu shot. So the obfuscation and the confabulation and the corrosion that you have to get through is absolutely astounding. And you're so right about that. So yes, if Trump did that, fine. Otherwise, we should act on that ourselves. I want to ask a question that I asked once before, and it's probably just a misunderstanding I have, but when I looked up grand juries and was looking at their nature, it looked like very few countries use them anymore, and they're absolutely amazingly rare. Is that true? And what would be the reason for that?
The model of government that we have here in America is essentially the same as almost everywhere else in the world. American government consists of 91,000 governmental units, and that's according to the 2010 census. Well, these governmental units are municipal corporations, all of them. Our federal government, our central government, is also a municipal corporation, basically created in a kind of advanced, but still in the image of the Magna Carta. Not much different. Municipal corporations, which are typically created public authority and popular sovereignty, they have the ability to create and own other municipal corporations, and then also economic interest in private corporations. And they have, just like any corporation, they have status as a legal person, and they have the ability to engage in commerce. They have the ability to contract. They have the ability to buy and sell property. All of our public school districts, municipal water districts, sewer districts, electrical utility districts, roads, highways, transportation, our courts, they are all municipal corporations. And so altogether, it's estimated that America has 184,000 municipal corporations, municipal or municipally owned corporations.
Well, that is fascinating. That is amazing because I've heard this so many times that, many conspiracy theories go into this and say there's two different forms of the government, and it depends on whether one is a corporation or whether one is actually truly founded separately, connected to the Constitution, so on and so forth. But let's go back. You had said that ballot initiative would be a way to bring forth the items that could be considered by a grand jury if they could be initiated through a grand jury administration that would be open to we the people. You mentioned, what is the difference between that and a referendum?
An initiative and a referendum are similar but different. An initiative is where we the people vote to create a statute or a public charter directly. A referendum is where legislation is put to the voters, and the voters approve or deny that legislation. And then it goes to the legislative branch for consideration.
I see. That's what I thought. I heard you saying that the ballot initiative that can create statutes. Well, what if there was a statute that said that it empowered the grand jury administration created by we the people to have full grand jury, and you call it petit, not petite, petit, right?
Well, I think it's petite. I think sometimes I say petit jury out of habit, but it's really petite.
Good, because I can't understand anything French. Thank you for clearing that up for me. So, a grand jury and petite jury. Now, so as these basically long forgotten forces are the very participatory aspects of government that gets back our sovereignty, and so I can see why they're so obscured. As a matter of fact, I had heard that only one country in Africa and America still use grand juries, but the grand juries that I see being used are stacked against whoever it is that the government is going after.
Yes.
Well, I think you're probably trying to, that's why I was saying many people will call this a conspiracy, but it's not. The government is actually a corporation and acts in its 91,000 different governmental units as a corporation, as well as a government agency. And so it seems as if the fine line between government, we the people, corporations, is no longer clear.
What has happened with our municipal corporations is that since the middle 1940s, it has been the norm for our municipal corporations to skim our taxes, embezzle an average of maybe 5% of the tax revenues per year, and then launder these public funds through municipal investments. That whole process has resulted in funding the deep state. And that's what we're going up against. And the deep state is very well funded. And those funds come from our taxes. But it's embezzled taxes. And it's a pattern of racketeering. It's literally a pattern of racketeering that involves, say, 180,000 plus municipal corporations. And so that's actually the scale of the problem that we're dealing with. Heard you discuss a lot about the British sources of attacking our sovereignty and subverting our government. But what I've not heard you speak about is this municipal investment and off budget accounting scam. And that's really how the subversion of our government is occurring financially. And that's critical, or it's vitally important to understand that pattern, because a grand jury is an expression of we the people's sovereignty. It's an expression of our authority to investigate and prosecute crime. It's an expression of our authority to protect truth. When we come to our representative government functioning without juries protecting the integrity of representative government, we inherently have embezzling, lots of it, because there's no accounting, there's no accountability. With participatory government being dormant, we the people are not creating any standards for public conduct. So when it comes to the legislative branch, local, state, or central government, we have all kinds of legislation taking place that should not be taking place. Not only the issues and the way those issues are handled, but the way the statutes are written. When we come to executive function, there's no standards for executive function. We have a rule by policy. For example, you can take the issue of, you can take the FDA and you can take vaccines. Well, vaccines are not regulated in a manner where they are protecting we the people. They're regulated in a way that's protecting the interest of the pharmaceutical companies. When it comes to our representative judiciary, we have no standards for adjudication of cases. I mean, we would naturally think that courts would adjudicate cases based on the facts, evidence, and law, but that's really not my experience. And I've provided a lot of litigation support, and I've watched case after case after case where the trial court and the appellate courts, they ruled on the basis of policy. They didn't follow stare decisis or rule by case law precedent. In most trial courts, they have no finding of facts corresponding to the actual facts and evidence in the case. And then when it comes to the appeals, what is the norm in the appellate courts is they just affirm the decision of the trial court and they give no written opinion. And then when it comes to our United States Supreme Court, you can read on the Supreme Court website, it says that they have between 7,000 and 8,000 petitions for writ of certiorari every year. But the court only hears 180 to 200 of those cases per year. And in my experience, for every case that makes it to appeal, there's maybe 1,000 cases in the trial court. And when it comes to the cases that actually make it to the Supreme Court, there might be a thousand appellate cases. So we have amazing, astounding deprivation of rights under color of law. It's systematic.
Yes, well, I want to underscore what you mentioned about the British, and I love to hammer on the British court systems and the Inns of Court, and the fact that the Queen has a court that overrules all those courts. And in America, I have been before the judge many times representing, well, not representing, but involved in cases with students, being a superintendent and so on. And I never saw any justice happen. Also, in the family courts that I've seen people, because of so many children in my school, haven't seen any justice there either. So what you're saying, I just want to underscore that's absolutely my experience. Now, but also the British, you know that you're going to esquire if you're a lawyer here in America, then you have standing. It's like you're a landed gentry, and you can stand up, and if that judge likes you, you don't have to follow any rules. And the judge, people don't understand in this country, the judge doesn't even have to be a lawyer, doesn't even have to know law. They can be appointed for life and know nothing about law whatsoever. And the legal administrative rulings are often made by lower court people, and oftentimes the opinions are written by clerks. So the deprivation of the justice system is absolutely staggering, and I totally agree with you. Now, in terms of embezzlement, the reason we haven't hammered so much on regional, state, local, because we're so busy hammering on the federal. But you're right, and I personally don't understand how that mechanism of institutionalized embezzlement actually runs. Of course, I assumed anybody in power, unfortunately, we see it all the time in the news, ends up trying to, do crazy things, which oftentimes means money. So yes, I think our system is broken, and you're right not to give any more credence to the local than to the federal. It's a very good point. Now, I want to go back to this point of the audit. What was it you were saying about the power of the audit in terms of the grand jury? Or that were you saying that the executive, that President Trump could say, or that we the people could say, we want this or that audited because we're going after public corruption?
Well, what audit implies is accountability. We have no audits, thus we have no accountability. Take the Internal Revenue Service, for example. The IRS has failed every single audit that the GAO, or Government Accountability Office, has ever conducted of the IRS.
I'd laugh, but that is absolutely true, and it is sick, and it's usually in the billions or tens of billions. It's just, how about the trillions missing from the Pentagon, for example? It's just absolutely staggering.
Well, tied into that, if you look at the Grace Commission report, which President Ronald Reagan commissioned in 1982, what they said, 1/3 of all income taxes are consumed by waste and inefficiency. And I have in quotes, in the federal government. 1/3 escapes collection owing to the underground economy, and 100% of all income taxes collected are absolutely solely absorbed by interest, in parentheses, on the national debt, plus government contributions to transfer payments, which is federal pension and social welfare programs. In other words, all individual income tax revenues are gone before one nickel is spent on the services taxpayers expect from the government, unquote. So that's what the Grace Commission said, is that 100% of all income taxes collected do not go to paying for the government services that we expect. So where's all that money going? And when you consider that we have over 100 million private sector workers, if say there's an average of 10,000 per worker that's extorted per year from misapplied statutes, misapplying federal employment taxes to private sector workers, that's $1 trillion per year scam. And how long has that been going on? 75 years.
Well, and as you pointed out, since the founding of the U.S. Federal Reserve, which takes all of our taxes for our debt for some money that supposedly they loaned us for some war in the past that none of us were participated in. And then also, we can't forget that 65% of America's GDP exits through non-taxed offshore accounts, which many of them are hedge funds. So right there, 2/3 of the money in America actually goes to the same people. Those are the
Yeah.
same people. And so, yes, it is institutionalized, and we should focus on that. But what I wanted to focus on today is what you have given here. My brain has received a revelation that if we reinstated the grand jury through the methodology that you have presented and through the mechanisms that already exist, in a way, it's like resurrecting the original spirit of America before it became federalized and also eaten up by the courts and eaten up by embezzlement and all this other stuff. But
Yeah.
what is here is hope. You're enkindling hope because most of us never knew you could look over that fence and see that greener pasture on the other side, because I didn't know that grand juries were essentially the primal group. And as you pointed out last time, the Supreme Court at one time, or at least in a certain case, or I think you mentioned specific cases, they actually had a jury. Because why? We, the
Oh, yeah.
people, are the sovereignty. So why shouldn't we, the people, be actually making the decisions instead of lifetime politically appointed, partisan, complete jerks who have their clerks write their opinions because when they speak about them, they don't even know what they're talking about. It is a complete scam. Why would we have a Supreme Court that is completely political? Let's talk about that soon. Let's also talk about what people don't understand. What's the difference between democracy and a republic, and why we have a republic? And we're going to go deeper into all these issues. So, Randall, I can't thank you enough for opening my eyes today. I have to really think this through, because this does seem to be the right outlet for what needs to happen right now. And again, as I pointed out, not balancing that with the concept of just a civil war that turns into the French Revolution that wants to use the gallows or the guillotine. I think we can, in a way, at least idealistically and theoretically in our conversations, point out a path. And if Donald Trump listens, and I know he listens sometimes, but I'm sure Melania listens all the time. So, Melania, would you please inform Donald that he has the power to empower we the people, since his court doesn't work system, the federal court system, the state court system, local, municipal, and he needs to empower us through a grand jury administration so that we the people can go after the embezzlement, the corruption that we see, and actually go after a secure America. And then that would support MAGA and Keep America Great. It would support his efforts. Now, this may only come about in his second term, but I can see that if Donald Trump took this up, what would be the harm of allowing this to happen and then giving credence to the determinations of basically a people's court, a people's grand jury? So, Randall, thank you for being with us today. We are going to beg you to come back again. Are you willing to come back and talk about some of those subjects I just mentioned?
Absolutely.
Oh my, I am very excited by this concept, and I'm going to be talking this up quite a bit. And I'm also going to look into more of this embezzlement in the local level, because I had never really thought about how bad that could be. I know a little bit of it, being in the jobs I've been in, and I've seen the grossest. Every time there's money flowing, someone tries to steal it if it's in an institution. And in the government, it's the worst ever. I've seen a lot of that in schools and other systems. But you're right to bring that to our attention. We should do an intelligence report on it. So, Randall, thank you. Your book, American Popular Sovereignty, A Guide to Restoring Participatory Government and Achieving Remedy, by Randall White, is the textbook for these civics lessons that we're giving. And we thank you for being patient enough to bring us forward so that we can see the things that have been kept from us because of the hoodwink that has been put over our eyes. So thank you for being with us today.